Do you want to step into a truly dominant mindset without feeling like you're just playing a role? Discover how embracing your authentic desires, removing shame, and learning to take control is going to transform your confidence and give your submissive exactly what they crave. I'm Brandon the Dom. Let's dive in. One of the biggest challenges for dominance is getting into the right mindset. Many believe that they need to step into some sort of role, putting on a persona, performing, or embodying some version of the stern macho dom that they've seen in movies or online. But being dominant isn't about pretending to be someone else. It's about becoming more of who you are and fully embracing what you want. When you act on your desires, you're no longer role-playing. You're being authentic and leading the interaction where you want it to go. To do that, you need to identify your desires, remove the shame associated with them, and then learn to ask for them. Taking these steps are going to grant you the mental freedom to do what your submissive craves, confidently and completely ravish them, like they're the most desirable object in the world. So let's first start with identifying our desires. At some point, your submissive is very likely to say something along the lines of, I want you to do whatever you want to me. What they really mean is they want you to act on your desires within their limits. Of course, saying that doesn't sound quite as sexy. So if you don't know what your desires are, how can you act on them? Instead of ravishing them, you're going to freeze. Your mind will go blank, anxiety will creep in, and you'll look at them as if they just spoke a foreign language. It's okay. It's happened to me too. To prevent this, you can do two things. Prepare beforehand by exploring your erotic mind and then engaging your desires in the moment. So let's dive into both of these. First, you can work on understanding your own erotic mind. And what I mean by that is your thoughts, memories, fantasies, activities that turn you on. This is going to be the key component to uncovering your core desires and getting the most satisfying sex tailored to you. And to begin understanding your own erotic mind, I recommend starting an erotic journal, a place where you can thoughtfully explore your desires, your fantasies, and your arousal patterns. And the act of journaling is really a therapeutic process, providing a safe space for you to explore your inner desires without judgment or inhibition. And starting with an erotic journal is actually going to be the purest form of your expression about what turns you on rather than taking a quiz or something, because it's free from outside influence and the thought of how you should be turned on. So for this erotic journal, what I want you to do is create 4 columns. You're going to have turn-ons, feelings, activity triggers, and partner triggers. So first, you're going to write down what turns you on. And in this column, you're going to think about your fantasies, your favorite sexual experiences, thoughts or mental images that really turn you on, or types of porn or erotica that you enjoy. By writing down these thoughts, you can start to identify reoccurring themes and some patterns that deeply resonate with you. And during this process, try and refrain from wondering where these desires came from. Just because you have a particular desire doesn't mean you ever have to act on it. This is more about understanding your erotic triggers so that you can incorporate them into your sex life in a safe and fulfilling way. Then in the next column, what I want you to do is write down how that certain turn on makes you feel. So you're going to take one fantasy, one sexual experience, one thought, or one favorite porn or erotica, and basically examine it in closer detail. You can practice by visualizing this erotic image as vividly as possible and basically explore some of the emotional and sensory details that make the fantasy so arousing, and thus gaining some insight into what brings you erotic excitement. And from there, you can start to identify, how does it make you feel? What sort of emotions does it evoke? For example, some of the emotions most common in my eroticism are being naughty, desired, appreciated, primal, respected, or worshipped. Now, the reason that we care about these emotions is because some fantasies are going to be too difficult to fulfill, whether that's on our own or with a partner. Some might be considered too dark, and we may never actually want to do them outside of the confines of our own mind. However, if we understand the emotions behind the fantasy, then we may be able to replicate the same emotional experience through different acts. For example, you might have a fantasy that's a capture and takedown, CNC, consensual non-consent fantasy. In this case, starting with some light bondage and heavy dirty talk may help you to simulate a similar emotion, but without having to go fully into the fantasy, unless, of course, you want to. The last thing you're going to do in the last 2 columns is identify the things that will trigger that feeling or emotion. Specifically, look for triggers that make the erotic image arousing to you. So this might be the environment, the attributes of who you're with, the certain sexual act that's occurring, whatever it is that you think makes it so spicy. Then start to think about activities or partner qualities that might trigger this same feeling. even if they're not currently present in that erotic image. And then you can write those down in their respective columns of activity triggers or partner triggers. And once you've done that, I want you to go through the same process with the rest of the turn-ons that you wrote down in column 1. Now, if you're a Dom watching this, you have the ability to lead the interaction. You have the advantage to set up scenes and scenarios where it engages with your erotic mind very deeply. However, some fantasies are not going to translate perfectly into reality. And sometimes you may not actually want what you thought you wanted. So what do you do then? Well, this is where we get to engaging your desires in the present moment. So the power of taking, which we're going to talk about a little bit further into this video, is unlocked when you learn to engage your desires in the present moment. As long as your actions remain within your partner's limits, you can move and act based on those desires as they arise second by second. And doing this requires you getting out of your head and into your body, listening to those subtle inklings and desires that pull you towards action, towards things that feel pleasurable in the moment. And you can actually start to do this on your own by improving your interoception, which is basically your awareness of your body in your inner emotional state. And you can practice this on your own by checking in with yourself several times a day, identifying body signals and linking them to emotions. This can be done by practicing body scans. So you can start by getting in a comfortable position, taking a few slow, deep breaths, and then basically mindfully bringing your attention to each one of your body parts in your body, usually starting at the feet and working your way up, and noticing what each of those body parts feels like without judgment or evaluation. So you start at your feet, move to your legs, move to your knees, move to your thighs, and just obviously keep moving your way upwards till you get to the head. And while you're performing a body scan, it's helpful to use more descriptive words. So something may feel squishy or tense, hot, buzzing, relaxed, sharp, heavy, rather than using words that are more evaluative or judgmental, such as this feels bad, or this feels good, or this hurts. The goal here is not to judge a sensation as negative because it's painful or positive because it's pleasurable. Instead, you're just simply gaining awareness of what's happening in your body. After you've practiced this for a while, then you can start focusing on pleasurable sensations, which is going to intensify your sexual experiences. So you can practice this by doing body scans, but instead seeking out pleasure as you do it. So continue the body scan, as I said before. And if you encounter discomfort or tension, think about how you could move, relax, or reposition to make that more pleasurable. And if you are experiencing pleasurable sensations, spend some time fully engaging with those feelings and seeing if you can amplify them. This practice of basically seeking pleasure throughout the body is what you're going to do during sex. You'll continually ask yourself, what would feel most pleasurable right now? And then act on that answer moment by moment. All right, the second major thing that you're going to need to do in order to step into this dominant mindset is to remove the shame for your desires. On your journey to becoming a Dom, you're going to be coming up against deep societal programming, belief about how partners should be treated and how power should be equally distributed in a relationship. And if you're anything like me, when I started out as a Dom, you'll repeatedly question yourself whether you're being abusive, manipulative, or if this is just simply wrong. You may even wonder if your desires make you a bad person. But if you're following the principles that I talk about in all of my videos and the guides that I write, if you're becoming a Dom because you want to lead them towards a shared vision, mutual goals, and a dynamic that you both desire, then stepping into your role isn't just for you, it's for both of you. As a Dom, you're taking responsibility for you and the submissive, and your decisions are made with their best interests in mind, so that both of you can reach the goals that you agreed upon. The mindfuck that you're going to have to walk through is what feels selfish is actually going to be selfless, because the submissive derives pleasure from being the submissive in the relationship. And if you deny them the opportunity to serve you, you are in fact denying them pleasure. And this is why consent, boundaries, limits, and safe words exist in BDSM, to keep your dominant power in check, to make sure that you don't become a tyrant. If you think about everything that you and your submissive could do as a sandbox, when you discuss their boundaries and limitations, you basically build the wall of the sandbox. And within those boundaries, you have complete freedom. You're allowed to do anything within inside the sandbox. Just don't cross the boundaries unless they've explicitly consented to doing that. And now that you know the boundaries, they want you to fully act on your desires. They crave you to not hold back, to not hesitate. They want you to take what's yours completely. To put it bluntly, they want you to lose control, fuck them like an animal, destroy them, and completely own their entire being. The key, though, is to be able to immediately regain control in case they call a safe word or need to stop. But you will never be able to give them that experience if you don't internally own your own desires. That you remove your shame and recognize that doing so is actually going to serve both of you. The darker the desires that you can alchemize into confidence and control, the more powerful you're going to become, not just in the bedroom, but every aspect of life. So if shame is holding you back from acting on your desires, I have a video on the 7 ways to deal with sexual shame for your desires, where I break down several different methods for you to attack your shame. Quickly, those 7 tactics are to leave groups where sexual acts are shameful, and then 2, joining groups where sexual acts are accepted. The 3rd tactic is to journal to work through these. The 4th is to digest your emotions. The 5th is to do exposure therapy. The 6th is to do a sexual disclosure, a very intense way to deal with your shame. And then the 7th way is to stop praising and punishing yourself. So I recommend checking out the shame video. I'll leave a link down below. The beautiful part, though, about when you start owning your desires is now you give your submissive the permission to own theirs. The more openly, honestly, and directly that you communicate your wants and needs, the more that they will realize there's nothing to be ashamed of. The more that you embody your truth and act in alignment with it, the safer that they will feel to do the same. If you give yourself permission to be a kinky degenerate, they will give themselves permission to be the slutty nympho that they're craving to be. The 3rd thing that you're going to need to do in order to get into that dominant mindset is to be asking for your desires. We know what they are. We've worked through the shame around them. Now we need to ask for them. One of the most common fantasies in BDSM is some form of consensual non-consent, or CNC. Have you read my writings before? You'll know that I say when you desire something, it's not necessarily the thing itself that you crave, but rather the emotions and feelings that it elicits. For CNC-related desires, want to experience a feeling of being ravished, basically experiencing pleasure from being taken by someone who is acting on uncontrollable desires, sometimes so intensely that it feels like force. In short, your submissive basically wants you to know what you want and to take it consensually without them having to think about it. You have to learn how to take for your own pleasure. Now that I just said that, you may be thinking, well, why would I ask for my desires if I'm just supposed to take them? And this is basically the crux of BDSM, which is consent. Even if your submissive is telling you that they want to be ravished, you may still feel hesitant. Too much in your head, too timid, overthinking about what you should be doing. And that mental block keeps you from stepping into the dominant mindset. But something amazing happens when you ask for what you want and then you hear an enthusiastic yes. See, consent isn't just about giving the other person an opportunity to say yes or no. It's not just for them. It's actually for you too. It basically gives you the permission to act on your desires without hesitation. There's no second guessing because your partner explicitly stated that you are allowed to act on those desires. Imagine for a moment you're at a dinner table that's filled with food and you're starving. All you want to do is dive in and start devouring it. But you don't know if you're quite yet allowed to eat. The host hasn't said yet. So if you start sneaking hors d'oeuvres without the host looking, you're going to feel a little guilty. And they might catch you and start to get upset. Now imagine a different scenario. Instead of sneaking them, you ask, may I eat dish 1, dish 2, and dish 3 right now? I'm really starving. And maybe the host says yes. And you are allowed to devour the dishes without hesitation because you know you're allowed to. The same scenario applies to sex. When you clearly ask beforehand for what you desire to do, and your partner says yes or yes within these limitations, you are now free to take without hesitation. Asking is what allows you to take. And this concept has been best illustrated through The Wheel of Consent by Betty Martin, which defines 4 different types of interaction. There's serving, where you're performing an action for the other person's benefit, such as giving them a massage. There's accepting, where you're receiving an action for your own benefit, such as being massaged. There's taking, which is performing an action for your benefit, such as ravishing someone. And then allowing, receiving an action for the other person's benefit, which is like being ravished. And these 4 quadrants that I just said create 2 key dynamics. There's the taking and allowing dynamic. One person is taking from the other and the other person is allowing that. And then there's the serving and accepting dynamic. One person is serving the other and the other person is accepting that service. Now the take allow dynamic is pretty much the bread and butter of a DS dynamic. It's pretty much the stuff that smutty romance novels are made of. When she wants to be ravished, this is the type of dynamic she's seeking. As the dominant, you're taking, and as the submissive, they're allowing. What creates the dynamic is the agreement. The dominant asks to take, and the submissive says yes. Now, this doesn't mean that the dominant is always going to be limited to the taking quadrant. In fact, I'm going to show you a little bit about how a dominant can be dominant in any of the quadrants. But taking is where you're going to spend the most time. That's what we've been talking about in this video. So let's start there first. So learning to take, you're engaging in taking when you do something to your submissive for your pleasure. The agreement for taking is established when you ask, may I, and you insert whatever desired action you want to do. And then your partner is going to respond with one of three options: yes, no, or yes within these boundaries and limitations. Where many DOMs struggle with this is the seeming paradox of leading while also feeling like they have to constantly be asking. And the solution is to ask before the interaction starts. This is pretty much the process of negotiation. So let's take the example of biting. I know that I'm a biter. I know that I'm going to want to do it during sex without stopping and asking. When the urge comes, I just want to latch on. So before having sex with a partner, I'm going to ask, can I bite? How hard can I bite? Can I leave marks? And if so, where? And if it gets too intense, what safe word should we use, or how are you going to let me know to back down a bit? Now that I've created the walls of the sandbox for biting, those agreed upon boundaries, I can bite until my heart's content as long as I stay inside that sandbox. Now, there are a few misconceptions about taking. The first misconception is that taking means you're a selfish lover. Let's set aside the fact that we've already established your partner wants this, and that acting on your desires in the moment is also an act of selflessness. First off, tending to your own needs and desires is not wrong. It's actually necessary, and only becomes a problem when it's done at the expense of other people. But in this case, you've already negotiated your limits, ensuring that what you're taking is within your partner's boundaries. Also, taking isn't the only quadrant that you're going to be in. You're not going to be taking all the time, and I'm about to show you here in a moment how you can be dominant in the other quadrants. But the second misconception for taking is that taking equals rough sex, which is not necessarily true. Taking simply means that you're doing something for your pleasure. And if your desires are slow, sensual movements, you're still taking. As long as it's your desire, you're acting on it and you receive permission beforehand. The third misconception is that if you're doing something to them, then the action must be for them. And this is often the mistake that people make with pleasure DOMs. A pleasure DOM is not a service top. And the difference is that a service top is doing an action for their partner's pleasure, but a pleasure DOM is performing the action for their own pleasure. And the submissive is simply along for the ride. The last misconception around this is if you're taking for your own pleasure, your partner is not receiving any pleasure. And that's not true. Just because you're enjoying something doesn't mean that your partner's not also enjoying it. One of my favorite things to laugh about is when guys say that eating pussy is not dominant. Clearly, that guy has never eaten pussy for their own enjoyment. Because you know when you are, because you're locked in, arms wrapped around their legs, letting your tongue do whatever it wants, and eating that woman out like you're on death row. Is she getting pleasure with it? Absolutely. But the action is for me, not her. At least when we're in this taking quadrant. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is learning to accept. Because after taking, the quadrant you're going to engage in the most is accepting. And this is part of the serve-accept dynamic, which is most commonly seen when the Dom asks the submissive to do something. You're basically in the accept quadrant when your submissive is doing something to you for your pleasure. And this agreement is created basically when you ask the submissive, will you do X, Y, or Z? They're going to say yes, no, or yes within these limits. At this point, you might be thinking, well, doesn't asking make me weak? And this is where a lot of beginner DOMs get stuck, assuming that asking undermines their authority. But let's clear this up for a second. First, asking, being vulnerable, requires strength. Confidently asking for what you want is an act of power, especially because it does require that vulnerability. And if you don't believe me, then go outside and go ask a woman for her number, and then tell me how easy it was to just simply ask. Second thing is asking is still leading. Leading does not mean forcing. It means guiding the dynamic. By asking, you create a space for your submissive to communicate their limits, which also strengthens trust, and that's a good thing. You can learn to make requests a little more sexy by using dirty talk, especially if you're doing it for a sexual act. For example, you can ask them, will you suck my cock? Which is pretty straightforward to ask. Or you can ask, you've been thinking about sucking me all day, haven't you, you naughty little cocksucker? Your mouth is salivating. You want it right now, don't you? Both are requests, both allow them to say no, but one is undeniably more engaging. But of course, there comes a point when you want to be asking without actually having to say words and be asking. There's times that you want your dominance to feel more authoritative. And this is where you need to practice commands, stating what you want her to do rather than framing it as a request. But the key here is that you've negotiated this beforehand. You still made the ask beforehand so that you know later on it's okay to make this command. For example, if you want to take the back of her head and command her to take your entire cock, it's far easier to do so if you've already asked her about their comfort level, their limits, and their gag reflex beforehand. That way, when the moment comes, you know she's into it, and you can give that command without hesitation. Now, what if she changes her mind? That's okay. People change their minds. That's normal. That's why we have safe words. If she needs to slow down or stop, they have a way to communicate that. Beyond safe words, you can also pay attention to their body language. Someone who wants to do something that you ask will be relaxed and eager to serve. Someone who doesn't really want to do it is going to be tense and hesitant. The next quadrant that you might show up in is the serving quadrant. And this is when you're going to be stepping into the role of a top. So a top is basically somebody that has the skills and abilities to perform specific kinky acts on another person. And when those acts are done for the bottom's pleasure, for the submissive's pleasure, that's when we call that person a top or a service top. Learning how to serve, to do things for your submissive's pleasure, is going to build trust, deepen connection, and sets the stage for you to take without guilt. So you're engaging in serving when you're doing something to your submissive for their pleasure. The agreement's basically made when your submissive asks, will you do X, Y, or Z? And you get the ability to say yes, no, or yes within these limitations. Remember, you're doing this action for their pleasure. So let's go back to an earlier example we talked about, which was oral sex. What often happens is a guy goes down on a woman and does what he thinks will feel good. Maybe what worked for a past partner or what they've seen in some type of porn. They might ask you to slow down, move over, or keep doing exactly what you're doing. And yet, that guy goes and switches it up. In that moment, he is no longer giving oral sex for her pleasure. He's basically serving his own assumptions. And this can actually get more subtle when a guy starts fixating on her orgasm. Even though she may not want that pressure, he thinks that because he made her come, he did something for her. But really, he was chasing the validation of his own performance. And when a woman feels pressured to orgasm, it can actually create anxiety, which blocks her from the ability to do so. To truly serve, you have to listen to what they asked for, and to do it in the way that she asked within your limitations. Now, you might be thinking, that doesn't sound very dominant at all. And if that crossed your mind, you may have a little bit of a warped view of dominance. As I explain in my video on the traits of how to be a good dom and my written guides of how to be a dom, being a dominant doesn't mean that your submissive is serving you at all times, solely for your own needs all the time. That's not being a dom, that's being a tyrant. Being a dom is more like servant leadership. You're steering the dynamic in a way that honors both of your needs and desires. When you're in the serving quadrant, you're still in control. You decide when to serve, just like you decide when to take. And your submissive, by contrast, is responding to those decisions. And the truth of the matter is, the quality of your leadership and how well you care for them directly affect how deeply they want to serve you in the future. Your service to them is going to pay dividends in devotion to you. Now, a misconception about serving is that serving means doing whatever they want, no matter what. And that's not true, because you still have limitations. You always get to decide what you're willing and able to offer. For example, let's take impact play. Personally, aside from spanking, which does turn me on, I don't really actually get a lot of enjoyment in doing a lot of impact play. I'll engage it from time to time if my submissive desires it, but within clear boundaries. I have limits about how heavy I'm willing to go or what I would use to hit her. If she wants something outside of those limits, I'm not going to give it to her. And that's not being selfish, that's being clear. Serving does not mean abandoning your own limits. It means offering what you freely choose to give. All right, the last quadrant is allow. And out of all the 4 quadrants that we've covered so far, this is the one that you'll likely find yourself in the least as a dom, because it's completely opposite to taking. And to some, being in this quadrant may even feel like switching roles. And if you guys enjoy that as part of your dynamic, that's fantastic. But there are times where you're going to be allowing something to happen to you and still be in that dominant role. So you're engaging and allowing when your submissive does something to you and it's for their pleasure. The agreement's created when they ask, may I do X, Y, or Z to you? You respond with yes, no, or yes within these certain limitations. I personally have two kinds of experiences where I allow something to happen. The first is with brats. I'm not particularly fond of bratting, and I don't find brat taming to be all too enjoyable. However, I do know how to do it. So I can do it, but it's a soft limit for me. That said, I've played with self-proclaimed brats before, and because I know that they love it, I'll allow them to brat me to a certain point. Beforehand, I make it very clear what kind of bratting is okay and what I consider playful versus being disrespectful. And when I say enough, that means it's enough. In these situations, it's obvious that bratting is for their pleasure, not mine. The second type of experience where my experience allowing is a little blurrier. Some submissives really have a deep oral fixation. They love cock warming, sucking, and just having something in their mouth. And engaging in those things might bliss them out so they can reach subspace and they could sit there with a cock in their mouth for an hour and be completely content. With those types of submissives, you might get a very clear and eager request. May I please service you, or may I please suck your cock? And once you give permission, they completely take over. They do whatever they want at their own pace and in their own way. It doesn't even necessarily matter if it feels great for you. You're just along for the ride. At that moment, you're basically nothing other than a flesh dildo attached to a body. Even in those examples though, you're going to remain in control. At any moment, you can guide the scene into a different direction. So allowing isn't submission. It's choosing to let your submissive revel in their own pleasure for a moment on their terms for as long as you decide to allow them to do that. And that's how you keep your dominance within the allowing dynamic. So these three things, getting clear on what you want, removing the shame around it, and then asking for it, is going to allow you to authentically express your dominance. The journey to becoming a confident dom isn't about playing a character. It's about uncovering and acting on these authentic desires. At the end of the day, what your submissive craves is to be ravished by you completely, to feel the full force of your uninhibited desires within the boundaries that you've both established, which is going to require acting on your desires moment by moment without apology, creating the space for her to surrender completely while she knows that she's safe in your capable hands. But remember, the dominance is not limited to that single quadrant. So whether you're taking for your pleasure, accepting her service, serving her needs, or allowing her to explore, you remain the one that's steering the dynamic. Now, if this is something that you're still struggling with, you want to know how to develop yourself, especially sexually as a dominant man, I recommend checking this video out. It's a quick guide. It gives you a roadmap of how to develop yourself sexually, starting from very beginner and moving your way up through different levels. So check that video out, and thank you so much for your time and attention.